Okay, let's play some goddamn fucking god fucking. Curse. Moose, goddamn son of a slut. No, put your goddamn black ass for stone. Holy fucking ghost.
And, there have been some surprising doctrines, though, things that I didn't anticipate coming up. CNN actually did an article on us not too long ago about rapture anxiety. And what we are finding is that a lot of people who have been taught and indoctrinated with this rapture belief have a lot of trauma and phobias. For instance, people who are afraid of heights because of the rapture, or they're terrified that at any moment Jesus is going to come back and catch them doing something and they won't be raptured. So these doctrines are creating constant pervasive anxiety and depression.
I had multiple dreams, and that checks off one of the boxes you have on your website. I had dreams about the rapture twice. Woke up crying. One was fire, and I'm going to relate as we go along to kind of give people a connection in some way. I'm certain there are several people watching this who are going to go, yep, I have had this or that or something similar. It may not be identical, but they're going to relate. And I ask the viewers to try to relate and try to see if you fit into this somehow. But fire was coming down, the whole sky was covered in fire, and then it was coming down, and it was going to burn me, and then all of a sudden I disappeared and I woke up. There's this guy with a feather pen who's whispering, Derek, everything's going to be okay now. And I'm like, wow, it's Jesus. Good. But then the other one was lightning bolts were striking, and I was in a thunderstorm just sitting on the front porch watching it, and then it hit me, and then I'm like floating up, and I'm looking around, and all these people are connected to lightning bolts. And so those are two little dreams that I remember vividly to this day from my rapture days when I believed in the rapture. It's kind of odd, though, that would be one of them. I would have thought hell itself would have been number one.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely ranks high.
Okay.
Absolutely. The notion that you are at risk, constantly at risk of displeasing or pissing off the man upstairs, and he is going to have it out for you. He's going to punish you. When you have that instilled inside of you, however it comes, whatever direct theological point that it comes in, if that's what you're...
You froze. Bear with us, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, you froze up for a second there, Slade. We missed you.
I'm sorry about that. I saw that.
Something about angering the man upstairs, and then...
Well, so it doesn't matter what theological point of entry that fear comes in. When you are constantly under shame and guilt, you're going to end up debilitating a lot of people.
So that's a big one. I mean, I've had issues with all of these. So what else are you hearing? I mean, what are some of the other issues that go along with religious trauma? Because I can't imagine it's just doctrinal. I mean, okay, yeah, I have this theology in my head of like, I believe that there's something, and you can convince yourself that stuff is true that isn't, hence heaven and hell, that kind of stuff. But what else plays a role in religious trauma?
Well, it might help to understand what trauma is first. Because when we talk about religious trauma, we're just talking about trauma. And this is trauma that has occurred within a religious context. So trauma is an event or a series of events or circumstances that a person or an individual feels as overwhelming and is disruptive to their nervous system, that then leads to lasting adverse effects on them and their well-being. So for trauma sufferers, you can think of the big ones like PTSD. A soldier goes off to war and gets PTSD after surviving a firefight, right? That could be akin to an altar boy being molested by a priest, or being raped by your dad, and yet your dad serving as an elder at your church and receiving all these accolades and praises from the congregation right before your eyes. It could be getting beat as a boy, as a child, and your parents using the Bible to justify abusing you. So you have the big traumas, right? Things that we typically think of. But trauma can also be a lot more insidious. And that could be things like the doctrinal stuff. So I'm just being told growing up that every sin I do, I'm murdering Jesus on the cross. And that's a big one that we hear a lot of. Or it could just be, and this isn't to minimize the more insidious ones, because the impact is the same in a lot of ways. But it could be growing up, always having to hide your sexuality, that you are a member of the LGBTQ community and you already know that you are going to lose everything and be ostracized and shunned from the religious community. So it could build over time, or it could be one major impactful event.
Wow. Yeah, that seems to be far-reaching, not just limited to religious stuff, of course. It could be in any type of circumstance. Trauma could be there, but this is religious-related that you're actually finding the statistics on. I find this interesting. So you are in communication with several religious people themselves and trying to help ministers and others. How do you think that's going in terms of the impact that that's making amongst the religious?
Yeah, as expected, we're hearing two voices for sure. The one voice is the ultra-conservative, religion can do no wrong, Jesus heals everything kind of crowd. And so when we put the numbers out there, when the research comes out and we're talking about this stuff, we definitely get some hate mail and blowback. We're seen as, the Antichrist and this and that. And that's expected. These are already people, religionists and religious ministries that are so entrenched in their way in the status quo that you really can't teach them much anyway. And they're hopefully on the way out. Hopefully those types of mindsets and organizations are dying. The other voice, and this is the good news, is that there are a ton more professional ministers and priests and rabbis who are more and more aware of the possibility of causing religious trauma in their ministry, and so they want to be trauma informed and more aware so that they can prevent it from happening in their own congregations.
Now, personal question. I know you there's a level in which you have to cooperate and work with people where they're at, and that's something I try to do as well. But on a personal level, do you feel like in some cases you're up against the wall because they're almost like their creedal confessions, their doctrines, where they're shooting themselves in the foot. Like, hey, I want to prevent trauma, but I have to tell them this message that's going to create trauma, or you know what I mean? like
I don't know if I'm shooting myself in the foot, or
not you, but if they are.
They are. Okay. Yeah. I don't know. I guess the first thing that pops in my head is, what's the alternative? Because we want, if they're going to exist, if they're going to stay in ministry and they have a message that they're going to still preach, then maybe we can help them figure out a way of doing it so human beings aren't getting harmed in the process. And perhaps it does open some doors for critical thinking and re-examining some of the real toxic beliefs that are out there.
I agree with you. I just kind of wondered if I put myself back in my shoes when I was teaching the Word of God. You talked about the hyper fundamentalist conservative Christian. That was me.
Yep.
That was you. And like I was like, how's it? I don't know if I would even cooperate with you, because I'd be like, hey, the Word of God says, and like so I'd go with what I saw the Bible seem to say, and then read that, and of course be like, all men are liars, you know. God is true. Spare the rod, spoil the child, right? Find ways to still spank. By the way, I used to spank my oldest. And I think that there's impact from those traumatic situations even with him. And I feel kind of a guilt, but it's a guilt that I know I can't change. I could just be the best dad and the better dad that I can be today. But yeah, like there's a lot of things that came from that kind of lifestyle. I just wondered how that works for you. But I imagine people who are more open to the science, open to the reality that we live in this world, this is a real thing. The Bible does not tell you exactly how to live in every shape, way, or form of your life. That maybe that could make an impact somehow in the religious communities. Because I kind of look at it like I'm trying to be fair and say, okay, several Christians are obviously far more progressive, far more open-minded to the world around us, and they're not fundamentalist. But you kind of wonder about the source. Like, do they need that source is the question I keep coming back to in my head anyway.
Yeah, and maybe people will come to realize, you know, if this thing is so pervasive, and yet it comes from oftentimes Christian churches, not exclusively, doesn't have to be evangelicals, but if it is in fact coming out of evangelical and conservative or high control religious environments like Catholicism, hopefully people are re-examining and saying, maybe this thing isn't as good as I think it is, as wholesome as I think it is.
Right.
And I'll tell you, when it comes to being trauma informed, our biggest goal, and this is across the board, we want to let people know that there are resources and help that's out there, that you actually can do something about your trauma. So if you are a pastor and a minister and you still need to preach the Word of God, you know, the one thing I hope that they will walk away with is that the Bible and prayer are not ever going to heal the trauma. It is impossible. And it isn't because of an outright denial of miracles and the supernatural. And that may be the case, obviously, from a personal perspective. That's the case for me. But you cannot talk yourself or think yourself out of trauma. You have to see a trauma specialist. And you need to get into things like EMDR or somatic